David Eby is the NDP MLA who defeated Premier Christy Clark in the 2013 election in the riding of Vancouver Point Grey. That came after a fierce by-election was fought between the two in 2011, with Clark being victorious that time around. The riding was previously held by Premier Gordon Campbell since 1996, so it was a bit of a shocker for a sitting premier to lose her seat, all while her party actually increased their majority in the 2013 election. But David Eby is one of the more charismatic members of the BC NDP, and he had a profile in the city dating back to his time at the BC Civil Liberties Association. But like most New Democrats of today, does David Eby have a radical activist past? Well, I'm just going to present you with some facts and allow you to make that decision. The BC Liberals love to remind British Columbians about the decade of darkness that was the 1990s under the BC NDP. You know the story by now. Scandals, runaway debt and deficits, and an exodus of people, capital, and businesses out of the province. But David Eby is not like John Horgan or Adrian Dix. He wasn't part of the BC NDP government in the 1990s. Instead, he was cutting his teeth as a student activist at the University of Waterloo. And I do mean activist in a big way. I found a 1999 article in the university publication Imprint about Eby. And you can see here on the front page, there is the Great Suzuki on the cover with some early era climate alarmism. This planet is screwed. Well, in the profile, it mentions that Eby went to Scotland to participate in an environmental activist conference put on by Earth First. But let me tell you, Earth First isn't just your run-of-the-mill environmental organization like Environmental Defense or even Greenpeace. No, they are far more radical. And at the conference, Eby learned how to make a lockdown, which is a steel drum filled with concrete that protesters chain themselves to in order to stop authorities from removing them before work can get going on some sort of project. But here's the worst of it. Earth First has actually been designated as a terrorist organization by the US Army. Now I'll tell you why. Earth First had a long history of engaging in more than just standard protests. In 1990, the FBI charged 2 members of Earth First after the bomb they had made blew up prematurely. Tree spiking also became one of their main tactics in the 80s and early 90s. According to a 1993 report, Earth First had been tree spiking for 10 years by then, and it was a concerted effort by Earth First to have other environmental groups be perceived as moderates compared to Earth First and their radical tactics. Look, let me tell you, tree spiking is extremely dangerous, as it can cause serious injury or even death to mill workers when they begin to cut the logs. But Earth First goes even further than that. They have a history of vandalizing ski resorts, golf courses, attacking nuclear power plants, and they even attempted to sabotage a motorcycle race in the desert once. So why would David Eby attend the conference of Earth First all the way in Scotland, presumably on a student budget, when they had been engaging in tactics such as tree spiking, among many others that I just listed, for well over 15 years before this conference? Well, I wrote to David Eby to ask him about it, and here's what he wrote back. Quote, "The article notes that my opinion of this public Earth First event, which I attended while I was living and working in the UK, was that it was, quote, pretty crazy. Nobody advocated the things in your list, but in any event, I left the weekend-long event early after the first day. I still think it was a pretty crazy event," unquote. Okay, Mr. Eby, that's fine, but isn't that like me saying, yeah, I went to a jihadist terrorist training camp, but they didn't advocate beheadings or suicide bombings that day, but it was still pretty crazy? Look, to me, I don't think there is any excuse to attend this Earth First conference given the long history this group had in participating in violent activities that even the BC Forestry Minister at the time, an NDPer, Dan Miller, referred to the group's behavior as, quote, terrorist-type activities, unquote, in a 1992 Vancouver Sun article. Eby mentions in the profile that he believes the use of lockdowns should be a last-ditch effort, but he didn't respond directly to my question about whether stopping the Kinder Morgan pipeline, LNG facilities, or the Site C Dam constitutes a last-ditch effort. But he did say, quote, "I have always been and I remain opposed to harm, violence, or injury to people for any reason, which is why I have dedicated so much of my life to human rights work, basic fairness, and democratic protections," unquote. Look, I know we all make mistakes when we are young and impressionable. But attending a conference by such a radical environmental group, far more radical and prone to violence and terrorist-type activities, and remember, that's a former NDP cabinet minister's words, not mine, it's just not acceptable. David Eby needs to disavow Earth First and their tactics, including the use of lockdowns and tree spiking. Two activities environmentalists in BC might be prone to using themselves as some of these projects get moving. For the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. I'm keeping a close eye on the NDP and their radical past until Election Day, May 9th. Keep it locked to the Rebel Canada YouTube channel for all your updates.